Welcome to Effective Teaching and Learning for Secondary Science. This is Module 4.1. In this module, we will focus on assessment, one of the most important parts of instructional planning and implementation. There are two main purposes of assessment: assessment for accountability and assessment for learning. Assessment for accountability ensures that teachers are teaching what they are supposed to teach, and students are learning what they are supposed to learn, which is often mandated by national or state standards, as well as district and local initiatives. Assessment measures for accountability often include state-mandated tests. For instance, in Virginia, the Virginia Standards of Learning end-of-course assessments are considered measurements of assessment for accountability. Likewise, assessment measures for learning determine the level of mastery that students achieve and their relative growth in knowledge construction. Thus, assessment for learning will be our focus in this module. Chiappetta and Kabbalah 2010 make the following statement in regards to assessment for learning. Evidence of learning centers on students being able to use knowledge about a science phenomenon and related skills to solve problems in context, to answer how and why questions about the phenomenon, to recognize what they do not know, and to provide convincing explanation for answers about the phenomenon. So assessments for learning are the types of assessments that teachers who are concerned about students' ability to use and apply knowledge are most concerned about. You can think of assessment as being the means of determining the extent to which students achieve the learning goals specified, as defined by Chiappetta and Kabbalah 2010, while also considering the differences among abilities, levels, and needs of learners. Assessment should not be an isolated event, but rather should be continuous and ongoing. With this in mind, it is important to recall the differences between formative assessment and summative assessment. Remember that formative assessment is used to inform the teacher's practice throughout the course of instruction and is often considered to be informal assessment, whereas summative assessment is usually viewed as a cumulative assessment. In other words, it is more formal. Both types of assessment are important for measuring students' learning throughout the course. There are four components of assessment that should be considered when planning and implementing instruction. These four components work together to ensure effective assessment practices and include learning goals, beginning of instruction assessment, during instruction assessment, and end of instruction assessment. Let's take a closer look at each one. Learning goals are typically derived from national and state standards, as well as local curriculum frameworks. As Chiappetta and Kabbalah 2010 states, learning goals are linked to assessment by indicating what students should know or be able to do, or what dispositions they should hold at the end of instruction. Remember that dispositions can be likened to attitudes. Learning goals are benefited by the use of backwards planning. That is, the idea of planning with the end assessment in mind. By utilizing backwards planning and considering what it is that we want students to be able to do at the end of instruction, we can better inform our alignment of learning goals to instruction and the assessment. Thus, backwards planning and the consideration of learning goals provides guidance for the design and selection of assessments and learning experiences to support student learning and growth. Okay, now that you're back, let's continue looking at the four components of assessment. We're on the second component, beginning of instruction assessment. Beginning of instruction assessment is important as it assists teachers in determining students' prior knowledge and, importantly, in activating students' prior knowledge. Thus, utilizing assessment at the beginning of instruction serves the purpose of diagnosing where students stand, what their conceptions are, and what their misconceptions are, as well as what instructional support students will need before they will have the opportunities necessary to succeed on the end-of-course assessment. Consider this. As Chiappetta and Kabbalah 2010 state, the diversity of today's middle school and secondary population virtually ensures that all students will not come to science classes with the same understandings, skills, and dispositions. Thus, by utilizing assessment at the beginning of the course, you are better able as a teacher to determine where instruction will need to be differentiated to meet all students' needs. The third component of assessment is during instruction assessment. During instruction assessment embodies the idea of weaving assessment into science learning experiences throughout the duration of instruction. In other words, during instruction assessment utilizes formative assessments with the primary purpose of providing teachers with information that will enable them to make adjustments to their instruction that reflects the progress and needs of their students. A key feature of during instruction assessment is cited as its seamlessness, meaning that instruction flows naturally into assessment and assessment flows back into instruction, per Chiappetta and Kabbalah. Finally, the fourth component of assessment is end of instruction assessment. At the conclusion of an instructional sequence, it is important to determine what students have learned. Assessment that occurs at the conclusion of an instructional sequence is often used for assigning grades. Thus, end of instruction assessment brings closure to instruction by allowing students to demonstrate what it is that they have learned. End of instruction assessment, therefore, is considered summative assessment. Important in the planning and implementation process is considering what this end of instruction assessment looks like at the beginning phases of planning, thus utilizing backwards planning. And remember that the end of instruction assessment should reflect the goals of science learning and enhance the ability of students to monitor, evaluate, and regulate their own learning.